Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Duke Football Coverage Podcast brought to you by Bull City Coordinators. You can follow us on Twitter at Duke FB Coverage, and you can listen to us almost anywhere that you find your podcasts, although we're not yet on Apple, but give it time. We're on Spotify, on Google Podcasts, and on Anchor. And if you have any questions or any suggestions, or if anybody out there who is listening is a former coach, player, somebody connected with the program in any way, give us an email, shoot us a line at bullcitycoordinators@gmail.com. Now for our next guest here on the program. Very excited about this one. For those of you who remember the mid to late 90s, where we're going back to today, we have number 44 of the linebacker corps, who started a great tradition of players wearing that number. Of course, we all remember Joe Giles Harris, who was no doubt inspired by our next guest and his choice to wear that number. We have Ryan Stallmeyer on the program today. Thank you for coming on, sir.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks, Ben. Glad to be here.
Well, as I mentioned to you right before we got started, I'm just going to begin with what are you doing now, because I did a lot of internet research on you and could not find a whole lot. So kudos to you for keeping your profile on the DL. The closest thing I could find to a picture of you was an autograph for sale on eBay and a picture of a Clemson player sacking one of your former quarterbacks. So whatever you've done to scrub your presence off, good job. Tell us what you're up to now.
Yeah, that's a good thing I'm not on the internet these days, for sure. Yeah, no, I'm, maybe a couple things about me sort of personally as well as professionally. So personally, I live in Cincinnati, Ohio. That's where I was born and raised. I'm sure we can chat about that in a little bit. But I'm sort of here just outside of Cincinnati. Married to my high school sweetheart, Heather. She was with me, as I was at Duke. And fortunately, she stayed with me. And we're here in Cincinnati. We've got two kids. We've got a 16-year-old daughter, Ava. She's a junior in high school. And then we have a 14-year-old son, Max. He's a freshman in high school. He's actually going to my alma mater, Elder High School. Professionally, I work for Fidelity Investments. When I graduated from Duke, I started at Fidelity sort of on a whim. I had a brother-in-law who worked there. And here we are, 21 years later, I'm still there. So I'm a financial advisor for some of our top corporate clients and their executives. So I work from home, and I enjoy it. And that's me.
Well, I want to make sure I heard you correctly. You said you have an older daughter named Ava and then a younger son named Max. Is that correct?
That's it, yeah. Ava's 16 and Max is 14.
Okay, and a little bit of weirdness. Our oldest child, his name is Mac, and our youngest child, our daughter's name is Ada. So little bit in reverse there. Kind of interesting.
One or two letters. We have the same names, yeah.
Exactly. That's kind of neat. Well, I thought I had seen that you were with Fidelity on the internet. I was not sure about that. So my son, Mac, he is a big into stocks, investments, those sorts of things. He's 12. So he gave me a couple of questions that he wants me to ask you. Why did you end up going into finance? How did you end up at Fidelity?
Yeah, great question. So when I graduated, I was a public policy major at Duke, sort of aspiring and thinking I would, take what was a natural path from that degree, which is law school, and actually sat down with the dean of the law school here at a local college. And for some reason, I just really wasn't into it. So from that point, I was like, oh boy, what am I going to do now? My football career had sort of winded to a stop. And it was really my brother-in-law, right? So my wife's oldest sister, at the time, I think they were probably just getting married. He worked at Fidelity as a financial advisor in Chicago. So I obviously knew him and got to know a lot of his friends. And that's really what kind of springboarded me to think about the career. You know how it is when you start a job, you sort of think, hey, if I can just kind of last 5 years so that I'm fully vested in my 401k, that would be a big win. Those are the sort of things you think about when you're in your young 20s. And as I mentioned earlier, it's just a great company, right? It's a big, large, diversified financial services company. And even though I've been at the same company for 21 years, I've probably done 4 or 5 different jobs. So it allows you to kind of bounce around and, do some different things. So that's it. I love my job. I love to help people. I get to talk to people about sort of what's going on in their lives every day and try to help them solve their problems. And yeah, it's just, I feel fortunate to have found fidelity, and that's why I've stuck it out the way I have.
Well, let's transition a little bit out of the financial end of things. I'm just curious, what was the transition out of football for you like? I mean, how is it when you go from playing on a big stage in the ACC against top programs to starting the rest of your life in your normal real world career? What was that like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think probably a lot of athletes and people that are sort of identified in a certain way would acknowledge that there is that transition, right? Whether it's sports or something else. For me personally, it probably took about six months, give or take, right? I mean, when I graduated, I don't necessarily think I was completely ready for it to be all done. I did sign with an agent. I did work out. I did, do the on-campus sort of workouts at Duke. I didn't get invited to Indianapolis. So I kind of went through that spiel. Didn't get invited to any camps as a free agent, which I knew was probably my path, if anything. And then at that point, like my agent's like, well, we can look at Canada or we can do some other things like that. And again, that's all probably from graduation to where I'm discussing right now is a probably 4 to 6 month kind of stint. And I think at that point, it's like, I'm done. It's been great. I need to move on. I need to get a job. That's just sort of how I was raised. It was time to sort of make my own keep. And so but I can appreciate the fact that it is a little awkward. You sort of be identified as, hey, you're kind of the big bulky football player. You've been playing football since you were a toddler. It can be sort of trying for some to sort of make that transition initially. And then over time, right, it becomes less and less of sort of how you think about yourself. But that's sort of my thoughts on that.
Tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into football. You said you were from Cincinnati and you're back there now. What got you into football?
Yeah, so, if you're not familiar with this part of the country, it's a football hotbed. It's something you got little guys out there at 5 or 6 years old with full pads on playing tackle football around here. So it's just what you do, Where I went to high school, if you ever get a chance to come through Cincinnati and you got a free Friday night, I'd encourage you to check out a high school football game in Cincinnati. It's pretty special. The conference that I played in, Cincinnati Elder, if you're familiar, Moore High School, St. Xavier, LaSalle. I mean, these are sort of perennial powerhouses year in and year out. So it's just what you do around here. So I started playing, in grade school football. I think my mom let me. I did a couple of years of soccer like most do. I think I put pads on. I think I was in 4th grade. I was a little bigger for my age, so I played with the 5th and 6th graders. Played, 7th grade was my last year of grade school. They had weight limits. Wasn't able to make the weight in 8th grade. And then went over to Elder. My brother, who's 4 grades older than me, he was at Elder, and he was obviously an incredible football player. So if you're familiar with the area, Cincinnati Elder, they have an old concrete, probably fits 8,000 to 10,000 people stadium, sort of set in kind of like a sort of city urban area, and I think it actually is named top 10 places to see a high school football game in the country. So that's where I went. So it's just what you do around here, and it's a great program. They develop great players. I mean, there's several several older players that are still playing in the league right now. Kyle Rudolph is probably a name you recognize. He was a great one at Elder. So that's what you do around here. You play football. So that's kind of how I got into the game.
What took you to Duke? How'd you end up there?
Yeah, good question. So my brother was 4 grades older than I was. He was the second-ranked defensive lineman in the state of Ohio in high school, and his 5 visits were Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, Illinois, because we have family in Illinois, and Duke University. I can vividly remember, so he was a senior, I was in 8th grade, when he finally said he was going to go to Duke. For all I knew, Duke was in New Jersey. I didn't even know what state it was in. Yeah, and people around here, like, it's changed, right? Over 25 years, it's changed. It's more, kids are going everywhere. I mean, I think the SEC has a lot to do with that in terms of, but around here, it's still, right? I mean, football is the Big Ten. So for someone to say from Cincinnati with the schools that I just mentioned that they were going to go play football at Duke University, kind of people sort of, I don't want to say they shame it, but they're like, really? They have a football team? A lot of people around the country probably still say that. But at any rate, so I kind of went into Elder. He's down at Duke. And obviously, I would travel down there when I could with my parents to watch him play. And, sort of started to appreciate, what it provided in terms of a great blend of both academics and athletics. And then really sort of the final thing was, if you can remember, 1994, right? So in 1994, Fred Goldsmith was named Coach of the Year. They had an incredible run, lost to Wisconsin. At that time, I think they called it the Hall of Fame Bowl. It's probably changed several times over since then. But they had a great team, right? Spence Fisher was the quarterback. Randy Baldwin maybe was the running back. Might be off by that a little bit. That was my senior year in high school when I was deciding where to go. So for me, it was probably down to like UVA, Illinois, Northwestern, and Duke, and I really couldn't make a decision. Had a hard time making a decision. Finally settled on Duke, and a lot of that probably had to do with things I just mentioned in terms of the current success they were having and whatnot. And for one semester, I overlapped with my brother, right? So my brother's 5th year was my freshman year. So we actually got to be on a football field together for 1 year, which is sort of funny because that first year I traveled. I never played, so I was able to maintain my red shirt. But I would so they would want me on the defensive field just to kind of keep up with, the schemes in case I were going to have to go in if someone were to get injured, which meant I usually put a beanie on and I played fullback and my brother's a nose guard. So on track plays and different things like that, I actually bumped into my brother once or twice, which I've never done before, which was funny. I still laugh about that. But long-winded answer, but that's sort of how I ended up with you.
So your brother, if I'm correct, that's Mike Stallmeyer, right?
Yeah, correct.
Now, you mentioned Robert Baldwin. He was the running back that year. He had a decent year, 276 carries, 1,187 yards. Decent.
Yeah, he was lights out. I mean, I don't know. There was a couple games where I think he might have broke the single game rushing record, right? He had like 200-300 yards in a game or two.
Yeah, he had a good year that year. Spence Fisher had a good year, but as was the curse of Duke quarterbacks for a long time in the bowl game, threw a number of interceptions. And I don't know why that is, but that just seemed to always happen to Duke quarterbacks in bowl games for a good while.
The team was really good. They were a pretty good team they got matched up against. I do remember that.
That line was really good, that Wisconsin line.
I felt bad for my brother because I think their center, Wisconsin football, right? I mean, they're just really, really strong in the interior. I think their offensive center was like the number 1 rated center in the country. Like he was, I don't know, he probably ended up playing in the league for 10 years for all I know, but it was a tough matchup for Mike.
And Barry Alvarez was the coach of Wisconsin then, and coaching against him in a bowl game is never good. He was always very, very good when you gave him extra time to prepare. So That was a tough matchup.
I went out actually with my parents and my aunt and uncle, and I mean, Big Ten football, right? I mean, they came out in thousands, you know. I mean, it was just, they took over the city, and everywhere you look, there was just tailgating of Wisconsin fans, you know, the whole beer and cheese thing, and then you got the little tiny crowd of Dukies, you know, and they were kind of wine and cheese, high intense. That was good memories.
Yeah, and if I remember that game correctly, what really turned the tide in that was in the second half, Wisconsin just starts handing the ball off pretty much on every play, and that line just eventually wore down the Blue Devils. But
sounds great.
Yeah, I mean that was a really good, like you said, that was a really good Wisconsin team, and that was a tough matchup for anybody. So
yeah, that was a great goal. I mean, that was I think Duke started off that year. I feel like they might have been undefeated for a bit, and then I think they had a couple losses late, but they still got that goal bid. I mean, that wasn't a New Year's Day bowl, but it was a pretty big bowl back then. There wasn't the hundreds of them that there are now.
So when was Mike at Duke, and who recruited him there? And then tell us the years you were at Duke and who recruited you to come to Durham.
Yeah, so Mike's a 91 Elder grad. So he was, you know, at Duke, from like 91 to 95 or something like that, 91 to 94, I guess. I'm trying to think who recruited him. He'll come to the house. He was coming back. Trying to think of who had this territory at that time. Actually, no, it wasn't him. It was Cecil Pete. I can't think of the gentleman's name. He was a defensive coach. Super nice guy. If you had any of the names handy, I could probably recognize it, but it wasn't. The name escapes me.
Well, Wilson was the head coach then, correct?
Yeah, he was.
And I think his brother might have been the defensive coordinator at some point, but that's getting into my bad memory because I was, I think, 9, maybe. Yeah, Eddie Wilson was the.
Who knows? My mother would probably remember. My parents would actually probably remember better than anybody.
Yeah, it looks like Eddie Wilson was the offensive coordinator and Dale Stram was the defensive coordinator.
Dale Stram, I feel like it might have been him, but I could be wrong.
Okay.
But at any rate, so Mike was a 91 grad at Elder. I was a 95 grad at Elder. So, I always joke, for an entire decade, my parents made the drive from Cincinnati to Durham to watch football. It was, a long string of Stallmeyers playing down there.
Well, so when did you come to Duke, and who recruited you in?
Yeah, so I graduated over 95, right? So I was at Duke, figure like 95 to 99, December of 99, I guess. Came up to the house. I mean, obviously Fred came up a couple times. I remember him dropping in on our Elder High School football banquet. He kind of surprised me there. Trying to close the deal.
That's Fred Goldsmith for the listeners out there, right?
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, Fred Goldsmith. He had this piece of dirt back then. Oh, geez. I don't know if it was Coach Mack or not. I don't think it was. So
when you come in to Durham, what are your expectations? What are you looking to accomplish?
I don't necessarily know if I had big expectations in terms of field play out of the gate, right? I was just trying to not be too homesick and not want to go home to my girlfriend and try not to fail out. That was probably what I was thinking my first semester there. I had a pretty good, so then it just, from there, you just kind of figure it out as a young kid. And I don't necessarily know if as an 18-year-old, at least back then, probably kids are a little more, would do that a little bit more than these days. If I had a 5-year plan on sort of what my goals were going to be, that's probably shame on me. Just work hard, and do the right things, and typically the things will work out the best, and they did. I had a decent run in terms of on the field and in the classroom. But yeah, that's kind of how I approached it.
Well, you and Todd DeLamielleure were some big hitters at Duke. You guys had some talent. Scotty Montgomery, Richmond Flowers, Chris Combs. There were some. You had Ben Watson there for your last season. You had some guys who could play. Billy Granville was there maybe right at the end of your time at Duke. You mentioned.
Was good.
Yeah. You guys had some talent. There were turnover in the coaching staff and things weren't always coming together, maybe in the win-loss record. And college football was changing a lot back then, right? It was going from small regional conferences to kind of the big business that we see of it today. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on the biggest challenge that you guys faced as a program when you were at Duke.
Yeah, it's tough, right? I mean, football is, you got 85 kids. And to compete at that level, it's different than if fielding a team of 10 to 15 kids. So it takes a lot to be successful, and therefore it takes a lot to turn the corner and stay around that corner. The biggest thing I saw at Duke, and we were pretty proud of our class, right? You named a few. You could add that list. Lenny Friedman, who was a second-round pick for the Denver Broncos. We had some other pretty good players that came in that class. I remember we were coming off a pretty good year that Duke had. So we always felt like, and I'm speaking mostly on the defensive side at this point, we always felt like we could compete with most teams. The problem you realize pretty quickly is when you're playing the Florida States of the world at that time, they're running 3 deep, So you're out there playing maybe 100 snaps in a game, and that's what our defense would play, 100 snaps in a game. I remember our last game against Carolina, we played, I think I had 55 snaps in the first half, which, a top 10 Division I football team isn't going to have, defensive side isn't going to have 50 snaps in the entire game. So what ends up happening is, you're playing Florida State's of the world, and they're running three deep on their receivers. And the only difference between the third receiver and the first receiver is the third one is a freshman 5-star All-American, but he's a freshman. So what ends up happening, and you alluded to it playing Wisconsin, is you get worn down, like for me, the old eye in the sky and film, it was by the end of the fourth quarter, it's kind of embarrassing to watch because you can't even get in the stands. You're that spent. So the challenge with programs, I don't know enough about the program today, but the challenge for our program, you just don't have the depth. Your first 22 can probably keep up and compete. The challenge is the second. You got to have solid second strings. In some cases, even have a third. And we just didn't have that, right? So we just couldn't keep up. There were more things than that, but that's the one that stands out to me.
Why do you think that was? What was it about Duke? Maybe the programs, the expenditures, the commitment to football that made that difficult?
Yeah, I think you just mentioned a few, right? Yeah, it was back then. It was. How committed really are we to putting a great product out there? Today they are, I think. I know they are. But, you sort of have that element. And I would also speak to, like I was saying in the beginning, it's a lot to put together a squad of 85 scholarship players. It takes a lot more to move a large barge or large ship versus a small, tiny boat that only has 5 to 15 players, right? It takes a lot to move the momentum of that. So those things are happening. On top of that, and this is nothing to be ashamed of, something actually to be proud of, is the academic standards at Duke, right? So when I was there, you have the ACT and the SAT as kind of those different tests that are out there to help you get into school or get you into certain schools. And, there's NCAA minimum standards. A lot of the people that we're competing against, as long as you hit that NCAA minimum standard, we're good. You got a green light. that the university will gladly accept you to play sports there. That's not the case at Duke, right? I mean, again, when I was there, it could be different. Sliding scale, right? So if I've got 20 scholarships to give out, I might be able to take 5 of those kids that hit those minimum NCAA standards. But then the university is going to tell me as an athletic organization that the next 5 have to be at this benchmark, which is higher than that minimum. The next 5 have to be above that benchmark. So that inherently puts you at it puts you at a disadvantage when you're competing against schools that don't have to do that. So, I mean, there's a number of factors, right? Those are just a few, again, off the hip that come to mind. But that's sort of how I think about that.
One thing that came up when I interviewed Ben Erteljack, who was another good player that overlapped with you, he and I kind of talked about how maybe the administration didn't appreciate the sea change that was occurring in college athletics at the time, and maybe the businessification of it. And they still had an idea that if you just hire the right coach like you'd done with Spurrier, everything will be fine. And really, structurally, there was a lot more that needed to be done at that point. I'm just curious kind of what your thoughts are on what the athletic department's role in some of the problems that happened more after you left, what their role in that is, and if they really appreciated what was going on with college football at the time.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question. It's a good conversation. I don't know too much about sort of what happened after me, obviously, but I would just parallel to running a business. You know, if I'm running a business, I can do the sort of lowest possible to keep my business above water and afloat, or I can really invest back in my business to try to grow and become a leader and gain market share, et cetera, right? So perhaps as a university, consider what was important to them with certain athletic programs. Hey, let's just keep this thing afloat, you know? We got a budget of X to pay our head coach and assistants. We understand that budget is X minus 25 to 30% of what our competitors are paying, but we're okay with that because we're just trying to stay afloat. We don't necessarily want to pay market share or market share plus to try to get this thing changed. So, I mean, that's sort of how I view it. It was just that wasn't a priority, perhaps, or a big priority for those people at the university that were managing their budget. I think that's changed a bit, right? I hope it. You know, they got some great looking facilities down there, and they got great coaches. And again, I'm not completely in the loop of what's happening. So I think that's one big element of it. And then I would go back to, you know, the academic standards that a school like Duke University has versus the other, some of the other schools that you're competing against in your conference. It's different, you know, so you're at a disadvantage.
Well, since you mentioned the coaching pay, I want to turn back to the coaches that you had at Duke. I know that when Goldsmith was dismissed, and we can talk about whether that in retrospect was a good decision or not in a little bit, but his buyout was very, very low, one of the lowest, I think, in the ACC at the time, which speaks to, I mean, I'm an attorney and I'm at a 4-person firm, and I like to pay people who work for us well because you get back out what you put into it, right? And if you invest in your people, you can hopefully get a better result. But I'm curious your thoughts on the coaches that you had. What was Goldsmith like as a head coach, and what was the transition from Goldsmith to Franks like for you guys?
Yeah, I like Fred. You know, I think when I think about the change, right, so when I think about 94 and the success they had 2 incredible coordinators, right? Craig Bull, as well as Heimdinger, I believe.
Right.
As the offensive coordinator. They weren't there when I showed up at 95. Right? Craig Wool got a pay raise to go to Nebraska. I can't recall if Humdinger at that point went straight to the NFL or went to a different college first.
I think he went to Denver.
Yeah, yeah. So there you go, right? I mean, it's not so much the CEO or the head coach as much as it is the people that are underneath them. Those are the people that are really driving the results. So, yeah, I mean, your question was about the coaches that I had. I had some good coaches. There were some good coaches at Duke. Again, it's when you don't have when you're not spending the necessary money, just like the people that work with you and for you, they're looking at the law firm across the street that's going to pay them what they're getting paid plus 20% or some number beyond that. They may love you as an employer. They may want to stay at Duke University as a coach, but they've also got a family to raise and themselves to look out for. So that's what happens at programs like Duke. And I'm not thinking, the schools around here in the MAC, right? Miami, Ohio, and other places that are similar. It's just what happens, right? So, yeah, I mean, the transition to Frank's, honestly, for a lot of those in my class, I can't exactly remember. I think that was on the tail end of our careers. That was disappointing for me and the guys that came in for me because we felt like we had the pieces in place. If we would have had some consistency in the coaching staff, or we actually could have made a decent run and perhaps made a bowl game. But then when you bring a new coach in, it comes with all new assistant coaches, and there's that transition period. It invariably happens. So it becomes more about the younger guys than at that time I think we were probably juniors or so. I can't remember specifically, but yeah, it was just sort of like, oh, geez, we lost our chance. That's sort of how I remember it happening.
Yeah, and I think to your point about the assistants, I was pulling this up while you were talking. Goldsmith had, if you go back to his first season, he had a set of assistants. They were gone at the end of that season. You had a new offensive and defensive coordinator come in for 95. In 96, you had a new offensive coordinator, a new defensive coordinator. Bob Trott stayed as the defensive coordinator for the rest of Goldsmith's time there. But then, you had Beckish for 2 seasons, Larry Beckish, and then Les Kenning came in his last season there. That's a lot of turnover, and it's hard to be successful when you have uncertainty at any position, but particularly at the 2 coordinator positions.
Yeah, I mean, for 4 playing years, I had 3 different linebacker coaches, right? Coach Mack, Coach Edwards, and then the last gentleman, who was a Duke grad. Trying to recall his name. That's a shame that I can't remember that name for 2 years. But at any rate, yeah. So to your point, it's that's tough, right? When you've got 3 out of 4 years, different perspectives on how to play the position, different coaching styles, different relationship styles, different communication styles, etc.
And athletes like routine.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Yeah.
I mean,
they do like their routine.
You can't get comfortable, and you go back and you look at a lot of the quarterbacks who don't make it in the NFL. One of the common traits is turnover in head coaches and turnover in coordinator and quarterback coach, right? Position coach. So it's going to be hard to succeed. But as part of doing a lot of these interviews, I've gone back and relived a lot of memories, pulled up games from YouTube that Ben was kind enough to post during the lockdowns of the pandemic. And I ordered Coach Goldsmith's book and read through that and looked at a lot of win-loss records. And to go back to the consistency issue, it felt like during that time period there was a lot of uncertainty at the quarterback position. Romine and Campbell were usually hurt in some respect, and you were subbing them in and out. But man, that last season, looking back on it, you guys were 4-7, and I think maybe a total of 8 points away from getting to 6 wins. I mean, you had a couple of close losses. You lost to NC State by a field goal, Vanderbilt by a field goal. So,
Yeah.
if you throw those, if you are able to turn those into wins, you're going to a bowl game. Do you think? I'm just curious. Two things, two thoughts on this. At the time that Goldsmith was let go, there were kind of rumors about him being on the hot seat when that happened. What were your thoughts about that at the time? About a new coach coming in, trying to make some changes and maybe get to a bowl game? But then looking back on it, I'm curious if your thoughts have changed at all, and if so, how?
In terms of when Franks came in, or that last year with Fred?
I guess primarily my question was directed at his coach Goldsmith's dismissal. If you thought maybe at the time it was a good or a bad thing, and maybe looking
Sure.
back on it now, if it's changed at all.
Yeah, my class was disappointed in that, I think, overall, for the reasons I mentioned earlier, right? We felt like we were really close, and we had, like you mentioned earlier, like, that's the thing about bad programs. We find ways to lose, and good programs find ways to win, right? We had so many that we were just right there at the last 10, heartbreak city. So we felt like, and again, I'm speaking mostly from the defensive side. Like, we felt like we were a pretty decent defensive unit, and we could keep ourselves in games, and we could stay competitive. So then when, the university tried to make the switch, it was sort of a, deflated feeling for us. Because, again, we were kind of on the tail end of our college playing days. And for, all the transition things that happened and whatnot, it just felt like perhaps, that was it for us in terms of having that opportunity moving forward.
What were from the defensive side of the ball, what were your thoughts on Franks coming in? I mean, I know Coach Trott stayed and was the defensive coordinator. Did Franks's strategy, offensive game plan at all affect what you guys were doing?
Well, the good thing is I love Coach Trott, and he stayed, and Franks is an offensive guy, right? So we didn't really see him a whole lot, which is totally fine. Yeah, I mean, he kind of did his thing with the offense, and you really had some kind of like, he was trying to, he tried to bring in some of the fanciness and trickery-ness of what his mentor Spurrier did at Florida, and it sort of didn't work.
Yeah.
As a football team, it's a big group, right? So you kind of worry about yourself and your defensive unit, and it kind of runs like two separate businesses at a company. So he was kind of on that other business offense, and yeah, he's the head coach. He'd get us together at the end of practice and say a couple things, but at that point you're a 22-year-old kid, like stuff doesn't work as well as it would when you're 16 years old. So it was good to have Trott back. Love Coach Trott and some of the other coaches. So you had that. You did have some consistency there, but it was sort of clear and apparent that the things that they were trying to do on the offensive side of the ball, right? If you can remember, they were trying to run the option and things like that with Bobby Campbell and Spencer Romine. Like, it just failed. So that was obviously disappointing.
Well, and the way that I thought about it was he was trying to run Florida's offense without Florida's players, and it clearly didn't work.
Yeah, I mean, you got to know, if you're a coach, you got to acclimate to the personnel that you have, right? You can't try to put a square peg into a circle, and that's kind of what he was trying to do.
Yeah, I think his offense was called the Airborne, but that was a little misleading given the results. What were and I'm not trying to knock the guy, but I mean, it just looking back on it now, was he the wrong guy at the wrong time, or was there a situation where maybe if he'd come at a different time in his life, it would have worked out better for him?
Perhaps. I don't. Those years are a little. I wouldn't want to speculate. he's a nice guy. I'm sure. I know he's a nice guy. Like I just don't know. I don't know. I don't really want to go there. Like perhaps there was a better way, but I mean, it all ties together, right? In terms of what the university wanted to do and what they wanted to spend and who they wanted to go get. I mean, perhaps you could have found kind of a younger, aspiring up and comer, but you got to remember, like they're not going to pay top dollar to get a top coach, so that's not an option, And Spurrier is saying, "Hey, I heard, or we all heard, right? He probably had he could have had some influence in that hiring decision, So, maybe they're taking his word for it to some level." And you roll the dice a little bit. It could have worked out the other way, and it didn't. So, who knows if he was the right guy at the right time. Clearly, hindsight, he wasn't. But just as easily in sports, the story could have been written a different way.
Right.
But again, right, so you only have the university's only committed to spend X. Like, it's hard to say, hey, well, if you would have got this guy, it would have been better. Well, that guy wants more money than you're willing to pay him. So you can't get that guy,
Well, you get what you pay for. That's for sure.
Yeah.
To simplify it, I guess. But I'm just curious, when I interviewed Todd, he had some things that he wanted to say about Coach Franks and all that and what happened. And my takeaway from that and looking back at a lot of the people who were transferring out, Todd did, Ben Watson did. There were rumors, I think, that the running back was Douglas was thinking about leaving. Richmond Flowers left. I mean, those guys were good players. What was going on at the end of that 99 season, which was your last season there, that was causing that, if that's something that you're able to comment on?
I think it's like when things are going well, everybody's happy. This is regardless of sports or what's happening in your life. When things are going bad in sports, in team sports, the nastiness and the ugliness comes out. And we weren't winning games. People weren't happy. These are the things that happen when, it's not unique to Duke. It's not, it happens all the time, right? It's just that we weren't winning football games. It was ugly. People were trying to, protect themselves. People felt like they were getting slighted. They were probably getting slighted in different ways, and it just gets become an ugly situation. With these sports programs, it's always ebbing and flowing. I mean, your goal is to keep it up at the top and try to maintain it, and that's really hard to do. I mean, we've seen that, recently with the Duke football program, but it was just a bad time. We were losing a lot of football games. People were frustrated. You put so much time and effort into the week, to try to build up to have success on Saturday, and then you don't, and you got to turn around the very next day and try to, put your shoes back on and try to do it again for the next Saturday. It just gets ugly. It wasn't a good environment. People weren't happy. Probably, like anything, you got to go to the top and blame the top. I mean, that's what you want, the top job. You got to understand that comes with that. And there were probably some situations that weren't handled the best way. And that's why we saw some people say I'm out. So yeah, it was, again, I would go back. I said it a couple different ways, I'm speaking exclusively about my class of 95, class of 99, I guess, where we felt like when Fred left, it was sort of like it was done. So that's my memory of it.
Let me ask you this. You mentioned your girlfriend watching you play football. I'm just curious. I mean, you're on TV pretty much every week. It's easy to see you guys, and it's easy to come, I guess it is a long drive from Cincinnati to Duke, but was that hard for her to watch you play at a top level of college football?
I don't know. Perhaps, right after the games, you're kind of like bruised and battered. Yeah, I mean, football. Cincinnati's a football town. It kind of comes with the territory. We're young. When you're young, you don't think about we're all kind of bulletproof. They're going to live forever. So there's probably some of that going on. Now it is interesting that I'm a parent. Watching my son out there, your mindset and her. You probably, the older you get, the more concerned you become about things like that. As an older person and also a parent. But at that time, she was anxious about it. She didn't really express it to me.
Well,
my mom was. My mom didn't like watch the games because she's an older person. She's a parent, and I don't necessarily blame her anymore. Being a parent and seeing your kid out there throwing it on the line and, seeing other kids get injured and everything else that goes along with it. But,
yeah.
I mean, that's not a hard number.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned being a parent. I mean, I guess, for your mom's perspective, you were the one I remember laying the people out and delivering the hits on folks, but it's still, if you'd been a quarterback back then, that I'm sure would have increased the anxiety level because they weren't protecting the quarterbacks like they do now. But it's funny that you mentioned being a parent and watching that. My son plays lacrosse and soccer.
Yeah.
And he took a shoulder from a guy on his last game that knocked him. And I was, where I grew up, there wasn't lacrosse, so I don't know the rules very well. But watching him play lacrosse at times can be really hard because you're seeing him get beat with a stick, and you're worried about the stick coming into contact with the head and everything. It's just, I have a lot of the same kind of thoughts you probably have as a parent watching my son that you have watching your kids.
Yeah, lacrosse is, my son had a game last night, so he's a 14-year-old freshman playing on the varsity team at Elder, and it gets aggressive out there. Actually, I didn't realize that the head medical doctor for Elder, because we had like several ACL tears this year already, and he said he sees more ACL tears in lacrosse than any sport.
Yeah.
So, the head stuff not so much. But the knees and the ACLs that we've seen this year, it's just incredible.
Well, they're turning on a dime a lot, trying to cut back to the left and get to the goal and come around the side and sling it in there. It's tough.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're traveling at a high speed, making fast cuts. They got a stick in their hand, which throws ever so slightly, kind of throws your balance off a little bit. And if you're running without a stick, there's a number of things that can happen. So. When you're, lacrosse is fun. I love it. But yeah, as these kids get old and become young men, it's visible.
Well, let me just ask you: do you stay in touch with any of your old coaches or teammates from your time at Duke?
Try to. So pre-COVID, we would do. It was really picking up steam. We were doing a one game a year. Let's all try to rally and get down to Durham. Hopefully that'll pick back up once the gates reopen. But I've got a few goodies that I stay in touch with. So I roomed with Gannon Shepard, Lyle Burdine, Mike Steinball. I keep up with those guys pretty well. Some others too, Austin Smithwick. But you know how it is, right? It's 25 years ago. We're all sort of spread out across the country, doing our own thing. So that sometimes is better than others in terms of the consistency. But those are your college years are some of the most memorable and impactful years of your life. And I have incredible memories of those years. And it was, it was an incredible experience, even with all the losses we took on the field. So those are valuable relationships. Try to, as best I can as a guy, keep them up. But my wife would say I should do a better job.
Well, it's as you get older, because we're probably right around the same age. I graduated high school in 99 or 2000, so you would have been about 4 or 5 years ahead of me.
Yeah.
You got kids and you're busy at work, and I'm more or less kind of running my own practice. It's a lot to keep up with, but we try to do the one game a year ourselves, and of course we missed it this year because they didn't allow anybody in. And I'm looking forward to getting back down there now that I'm fully vaccinated. And
what are they hearing? Is that going to happen? Do we even know that yet?
I don't know. I'll tell you what I have learned from doing these interviews is that, and you saw it with the basketball program too. So I'm this last football season was brutal, right? But I think Duke took COVID a lot more seriously than a lot of schools, and I think that has a lot to do with it. That outbreak at the end of the season on the basketball team, and that you've seen with the fraternities, is probably alarming to the administration. I think they're going to take it very seriously. I wouldn't, if I had to guess, and this is pure speculation, it's inadmissible in any court of law, obviously, because it's pure speculation, but my guess is going to be that they'll limit the number of people who can come in, and they're going to require you to show proof of vaccination or take some other efforts to protect yourself. I think they're probably going to require you to bring your vaccine card with you and show it. That's my guess.
Yeah. Well, it's a private institution. I think they theoretically have that right,
Right.
So, well, that's good. I mean, I would love to be down there for lacrosse games this spring. Obviously, I don't think they're letting anybody in for those, but yeah, maybe by the fall can get down there. We look forward to that. My kids look forward to that trip every year. It's a great time. So,
well, and it's a much better game day experience now than what it used to be. I mean, the seats are more comfortable. The concessions are better. Everything about it has improved. And I think, and I mean, look, you and I have talked a lot for about an hour about, a lot of losses and difficult times. But, I think you guys were kind of the sacrificial lambs to make the program realize what it needed to do to get to a point where they can win an ACC Coastal, right? Where they can go to 4 straight bowl games, where they can go play in the Peach Bowl. And that's what I'm going to call it. I'll never not call it that. But, you guys were kind of thrown to the slaughter. But without that experience, I don't think that we get to a point where we hire a guy like Cutcliffe, right?
Yeah.
And we don't upgrade the programs, and we don't have that great indoor facility, right? I mean, it's it's painful when you go through it, but sometimes you look back on those painful memories and you learn a lot. I mean, I remember, in my own life, there was a time where I was trying to manage a big issue at my old firm. That was to try to explain all that would take forever, so I'm not going to, but it was a big issue that I, as an associate attorney, not even a partner, was tasked to manage, that I shouldn't have been tasked to manage. And I learned from that. That was a brutal 2 years of my life. You can ask my wife about it. But my takeaway from that was you have to be in control of your own practice, and you've got to be in control of what you do every day. And when you're able to, have that control, things get a lot better. So yeah, it was a brutal 2 years, but it helped me in the long run. So that's how I think about the post Spurrier era up until Cutcliffe, is particularly the Franks and Roof years, is those were necessary to get the program to where it is today. And I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, you're probably right. Yeah, I mean, God bless, whoever made the decision to hire Coach Cutcliffe, right? And he's been an incredible leader. It is interesting. I talked a lot about, the assistant coaches earlier, but, you do have to have a guy in charge, the face of the organization, and he's been an incredible one. And we're all lucky to have him for as long as we have. I'm hopeful that they can, like you said, this last year, unfortunately, it was almost like a throwaway year. And I feel bad to say that for the players and the work they put in, because I know they work hard. But yeah, it was just a weird time. Like, hopefully they can get back on track. I'm excited to see it. But yeah, you're probably right. It was some down years, and perhaps that was what led to those that make those big decisions saying enough's enough. The university and the alumni deserve better than what we're providing them on Saturday afternoons, and they made that switch.
Well, tell us what your favorite moment at Duke is.
Favorite moment at Duke? Wow, on the field or off the field?
Either one, both, whatever you want to say.
My memory's a little fuzzy now. You got to remember, I probably lived with a concussion for 4 years.
I shouldn't laugh about that, but
you can laugh, no, but it was a much different game back then, and I played it a little differently than you're allowed to play it today. Man, my memories are just cheese and peas. I mean, it ranges. I mean, from at the time what were miserable things, which was being in that locker room at 6 a.m., eating frozen bagels and frozen bananas to get on the field or out on the training fields at 6:30. The time in the film rooms where you're just nodding off, like so exhausted, just watching the repetitive play after play, to the game days on Saturday. And there's no other feeling of coming out of a tunnel. Mostly away games because our environment wasn't great back then. But, coming out of a tunnel, for example, at Florida State, and just the hairs on your arms standing up, like you can't recreate that. People try to recreate it sometimes artificially, but the adrenaline running through your body and getting yourself up to that heightened sort of sense. I mean, it's undescribable. If you've not been in that situation, you don't know how to even understand it. And to be out on that field, and I remember the big hits, right? Playing against incredible players, like it's all wrapped up into one memory. And the older you get, it's just kind of like the lines get a little fuzzier. But it's all one big memory. And that, like I said earlier, it's all good. Some heartbreaks, some disappointments, the beating, the getting beat up. But, that's what I remember my experience and the friendships. I talked about that earlier. Like, you go through something like that with guys, it builds an incredible bond, a lifetime bond that, you might not see each other for decades, and you see each other for the first time in decades, and it's like you just pick right up where you left off. So great years of our lives in college, and great experience to be able to play Division I football in a top conference against great players. Those are the things I remember.
Well, that's great, and I appreciate you taking the time to come on and do this interview today, and I appreciate your time at Duke. You were a fun player to watch. You guys, like you said, you would give us hope for about 3 quarters, and then being a little bit older now, I can see and appreciate things that I didn't appreciate when I was in high school watching you guys, right? And so when I was watching some of these old games, I could start to see like, oh, here's where the problem's going to come in. And I think your point's right. It was just, it wasn't anything that necessarily you guys were doing wrong. It was just the circumstances that you had of depth and commitment from the athletic department. But you guys, I mean, I never felt like you guys quit or gave up. I always felt like you guys, particularly on the defense, brought everything you had every play. And you guys were a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, no, and I will 100% agree with that. We all had too much self-pride to ever. That's the crazy thing. Like, I think back on it, like, we would walk into a Saturday afternoon playing a top 5 Florida State team, and we thought we were going to win. Like, it would ruin. Like, now, as I'm in my mid-40s, like, I probably wouldn't think the same thing. Well, you're 18, 20 years old. That's the way you think. So, yeah, we never quit.
And that was when Florida State was still Florida State.
Yeah, Peter Warwick, Ward Dunn, like
Chris Winkie.
Philip Seymour's and these defensive ends that were like the nastiest defensive ends in the country. Like, yeah, they were it back then.
they were the real deal. And you guys, you guys went out there every week, despite everything that you guys went through, and started rebuilding that program back. And I wish you guys had gotten one more year under Goldsmith to see if you could have gotten back to a bowl, because after that winless year, there were a lot of signs of life that were coming back, and it was unfortunate that it got cut short. But
Yep.
I appreciate all you did at Duke. I thank you for coming on. Hold on just for a second while I do this outro here. But we just want to say thank you to Ryan Stallmeyer for taking time on a Saturday to come on the podcast and do this interview. As I said earlier, you can listen to us on Google Podcasts, on Spotify, on Anchor, almost anywhere you get your podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter at Duke FB Coverage. A little tease as we go out. We have some more interviews that we have planned and locked down. I think they are going to be exciting and you will enjoy them. And like I said, if you have any questions, any comments, if you're associated with the program in any way and you want to come on and do an interview, you know how to get in touch with us. Send us a message on Twitter. My DMs are open. Send us an email, bullcitycoordinators@gmail.com. We'll be back next time with more interviews, and we look forward to putting on as much content as we can.